This is cold. I got Gatorade and green tea in here. Makes me feel like a crazy man. I'm Jack Kelly. I'm a retired special agent from the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA. The Kinahans are in my newsfeed. I'm following everything. I was reading about the Kinahans and the war they had with the Huts. The 18 people get killed. It's like mayhem on the streets. Nothing ever happens to these dudes. But Daniel Kinahan, he made what I call the John Gotti mistake. I'm like one of the top gangsters in the world. I'm living it up in Dubai. I'm hanging out at the pool every day. But if no one knows who I am, what good is it? And then he decides to get into boxing promotion.
Just after getting off the phone with Daniel Kinahan, the biggest fight in British boxing history has just been agreed. Get up there, my boy!
Now everyone knows who the Kinahans are. The dude was becoming the shiny object. These cops all over the world, and they want to be the guy that gets that head up on their wall. It's their ego. It always brings them down.
Transnational criminal organization, also known as the KTCO, has been accused of a wide range of heinous crimes all around the world, including murder, trafficking in firearms, and narcotics.
We begin with breaking news today. A drug bust at the port of Philadelphia.
What you see here is only a quarter of the total seizure.
It was 39,524 pounds of cocaine, valued at about $1.3 billion.
Bingo!
The Kinahans were street dealers who became billionaires.
You showed us that you've got massive balls and $140,000 on them! So!
When you see the DEA are on their case, you're up there with the most wanted globally. You're in the league of Pablo Escobar, Chapo Guzman. They come a long way.
The United States Department of State is pleased to announce a reward of up to $5 million for information leading to the financial disruption of the KTCO or the arrest and convictions of its leaders. Christopher Vincent Kinahan, Daniel Joseph Kinahan, and Christopher Kinahan Jr. The United States will bring their leaders to justice, no matter where they are.
Very warm welcome. Looking forward to the pleasure of your company for the next 3 hours.
You're right here, gents. Yeah. That's what you're taking pictures of.
Sorry, Joe.
Is that your reason?
We're making a documentary about the thing that happened here a while back. We won't be around for very long.
And where are you from? Like which?
BBC.
BBC?
Yeah.
Oh, Christ. Is it a good or a bad thing?
I don't know.
It's just because all those years ago, a lot of people were doing the same thing, so
I bet.
It's just good. We just have to check in.
No problem, mate. All right. Cheerio.
John Glynn is on the line. He's general manager of what's now known as the Bonington Hotel. It obviously was the Regency Hotel. there was hardly a day when the name Regency was not in the newspapers or on radio or television, known as the Regency shooting, the Regency killing, the Regency attack. That must have been extraordinarily difficult.
It was, Joe. It was the last thing that I ever thought of could happen in the Regency.
I'm Ernie Leslie, a photographer with the Sunday World, and my colleague here, Alan Sherry. Say hi, Alan.
How are you?
We were assigned to cover a boxing weigh-in which was taking place at the then Regency Hotel, and which was involving MGM boxers, which is run by Daniel Kinahan. He was trying to show himself as a different character to what was being portrayed in the media as a gangster. He comes across as a very personable type of guy, as long as he's not trying to shoot you. We were hoping that we would get photographs of members of the gang, either Daniel and Christopher Kinahan or other associated members of the gang.
There was a feud going on at the time. There'd been 3-4 different shootings, some fatal, some not, in the build-up to this.
They were escalating to the point that it was going to reach a head at some stage.
I suppose whenever there's a gangland feud, there's always a chance of something happening.
My name is Mel Crystal. I'm currently the chairman of the Boxing Union of Ireland. Clash of the Clans was a major international promotion. It was a sellout. On an official level, there was no problem back in 2016 with MGM, save for what was being written in the tabloids. But, I mean, we're not fools. There's no smoke without fire. But turning up for the weigh-in on that day, there was absolutely nothing untoward to be felt or seen.
As we drove in, we didn't see anything that we recognised. So it was kind of a bit flat, atmosphere-wise, to be honest.
We were almost at the end of having weighed in 18 fighters. A fighter from Mayo, his weight had been declared, and I was in the process of converting pounds to kilos when all hell broke loose.
We were sitting there probably just talking shite like you do, and suddenly a bang went off.
Sounded like a gunshot. But of course we didn't actually believe that that could be happening at an international boxing weigh-in in the middle of the day in a hotel full of people. We no more had the words out of our mouth when I noticed people running across the top of the street in panic, and I just quickly realised that that's exactly what was going on.
There was a male dressed in a skirt and a long wig beside a middle-aged gentleman wearing a flat cap, and it was one or both of those who had fired shots at the back of the hall. There were little kids there, and now they were part of a war zone.
Within seconds of that bang, there was just people started flying by. There was people in cars, mounting footpaths up here. They were just all getting out whatever way they could.
We immediately shot out, bang, 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 bang. There was more shooting.
I was in the hotel bar with the general manager of the hotel running through the business for the weekend. There was a couple of shots fired. Within then maybe 15 seconds, 3 uniformed Gardaí came in to the bar area and told everyone that this is the Gardaí to lie down on the floor and put your hands behind your head. At this point, I was starting to panic. I really didn't believe these guys were guards.
I heard 2 gunshots and 2 gunmen dressed up in Garda uniform came in through the front door into the lobby. One guy was running through the lobby. He just shot him in the leg. I jumped straight over the receptionist's desk. The gunman then leaned over the receptionist's desk, was pointing the gun down at me, and I was screaming, "Don't shoot, don't shoot." I thought I was going to die, like, you know, it was utterly terrifying.
There was a couple of shots fired, and then just through a window in the bar, I saw a man basically getting assassinated.
It's all happening so quickly. You're hearing gunshots going off. You're trying to ascertain where they're coming from.
And as we approached here, we noticed the silver van. The window was open and a hand popped out with a machine gun. I stopped the car immediately, grabbed the camera, and as I pulled it up to shoot, something running, movement from down the end of the road caught my eye, and it was a person running towards us, which didn't look right. And I immediately switched from the car, banged off a number of frames. I knew that I had got something really significant.
At that point, people dressed in fake Garda uniforms, who were the so-called TAC team, with their assault rifles as well, start making their way back towards the van. But then the driver's attention was drawn towards us. Assault rifle turned around from pointing forward to suddenly turning back and pointed at us, and we weren't in an armoured car, so if he started opening fire, we were fucked.
Came back to the van, and at that stage, Alan was telling me, "Get the fuck out of here," is what you said.
I think it might have been, yeah.
I got a bit of a sinking feeling when I saw there was no cars out there at all. There was nothing.
I made my way down to the reception where I had heard the explosions, and that's when I saw the horrific scene there. There was a person lying on the ground, faceless. His face had been removed, obviously by one of the gunshots.
We discovered what had happened inside not too long after, but it was very apparent very immediately that there had been someone shot dead inside. We knew who he was aligned to. We knew it was an attack on the Kinahan organisation, and we knew who the main suspects would be because of what we've been writing about for the previous few months.
This is the offices of the Sunday World here on Talbot Street, Media House. It is now. I'm Nicola Tallant. I'm the investigations editor with the Sunday World, and I've been a journalist for nearly 30 years. So, the newsroom's on floor 3. In my journalism, almost every story I've done has gone back to cocaine. And then in the last 20 years, really, every story about cocaine has gone back to the Kinahans. That's how significant they are. Afternoon.
There we go.
Going to do a little bit of podcasting now.
Yeah.
Those things.
That's good. Not bad. Not bad.
So when people talk about Ireland, they talk about drugs, your brain goes to the Kinahans.
They've really put us on the map internationally. They're on wanted posters. There's 5 million bounties on their heads. If they were a football team, we would be celebrating. We would be welcoming them home in an open-top bus. They're not. They were street dealers who became billionaires. The Regency wasn't an isolated event. It was a culmination of the implosion of the Kinahan organised crime group, which started really months previous. Things started going wrong. There was jealousies, there was accusations of touting, there was accusations of money being owed. There was a lot of kind of building tensions that we, just as newspaper journalists, were able to read the signs of.
Detectives believe the attack was part of an ongoing Dublin criminal gang feud. The dead man, David Byrne, and the 2 injured were known to Gardaí.
David Byrne was dead. Hugely significant individual, a brother of Liam Byrne. The 2 of them headed up the Dublin headquarters, essentially, of the Kinahan Cartel. He was a friend of Daniel Kinahan.
He was very, very friendly with all the top kind of players of the Kinahan Cartel. You knew once he was killed that there was going to be serious retribution.
After the Regency happened, it was almost like an explosion went off, and there was kind of this reverberating white noise there.
The funeral is taking place today of David Byrne and has sparked a major Garda security operation.
The David Byrne funeral was terrifying. It was a Mafia funeral held in Dublin, and the police had to stand back and let that happen.
The headline is "Bling Out Your Dead." I'm only quoting from the newspapers. The funeral will forever go down in history as being a who's who of the Irish criminal underworld.
Absolute show, flaunting the money they have got from drugs.
This is the mobs type stuff. This is mafia type stuff.
Why are our guards there protecting them?
It was a display of power, and it was choreographed to spread fear. It was an absolute look into the dark heart of the Kinahan Cartel. You know, they came out en masse wearing a uniform. Blue shirt, black tie, and Daniel Kinahan was photographed here, front and central. It put the Kinahan name into the consciousness of Ireland. People were talking about the Kinahans. They were wondering who they were, where they had come from. How come the city has been shut down for this funeral? To understand that, you had to go all the way back to the ambition of Christy Kinahan and where that started. Christy Kinahan Senior would be like a cuckoo in the nest of organised crime. He doesn't really fit.
It is pleasant, as you stroll through Stephen's Green, to see sitting there, relaxed, at their ease, the well-fed, happy citizens of Dublin enjoying the view.
Christy Kinahan Senior came from a very stable family home, and he was the only boy in that house, so he was spoiled, doted on, adored.
This is the street where Christy Kinahan actually grew up. This is a very desirable location to live. His father was working up in a taxi rank up at the Gresham. His mother actually ran a B&B from their home here. This is not the normal place where an organised criminal had grown up. He kind of had everything, and he could have been everything, but instead he chose to take all those talents and to bring them into organised crime.
Somewhere around his late 20s, we find him in an environment where he doesn't belong. He's eyeing up criminal enterprises, knocking around in the north inner city. His middle-class manners mean that he's a great sort of fixer for the gangs.
My name is Michael O'Sullivan. I'm a former Assistant Commissioner in An Garda Síochána, which is the Irish Police Force. I joined the Guards when I was 20. Dublin at the time was quite depressed. There was a recession on. There wasn't a lot of employment. There was a lot of crime. So Chris Kinahan, he didn't feature very highly. He was petty enough criminal, for want of a better term. He was what's described as a kite man, which is a check man. He'd be a guy who could pass himself off as English or as well-spoken from Ireland. He would put on a posh accent and go and bounce checks and disappear again. As criminals go, he was inconsequential. However, he was very strategic in the way he would think, and he was always looking to earn that extra money. He was an opportunist, and he began to see that there was an easier life than bouncing checks, and there was far more money. He decided that he would get into the heroin business.
Dublin's sudden heroin epidemic is now threatening the very lifestyle of the city, where children as young as 9 and 10 have taken the drug, and in some areas there's some heroin addiction more than in the worst black ghettos in New York.
Well, heroin sold on the streets of Dublin in 10 packs, costing £10 each. It would contain sufficient for one injection, one fix.
And that's what the kids are queuing up for?
Yes, that's what the young people would buy.
1 minute heroin wasn't there, and then the next minute it seemed to be everywhere. Friends used it, cousins used it, family members. Not unusual to have everybody in the family using heroin. And it brought about complete chaos.
In the spring of 1981, the then Irish Prime Minister Charles Haughey summoned the country's top 4 policemen to an unprecedented emergency meeting on drugs. He began by asking, who the hell are the Dunns? Most of Dublin already knew the answer to that question.
The Dunn family, they were the crime family in Dublin City. It was common knowledge that Larry Dunn had introduced the heroin. The public saw him as the Al Capone of Dublin.
The police believe that it was this family who pioneered Dublin's heroin epidemic.
Follow that car, huh?
My name is Ronnie Bourne, and I'm a community activist for the last 40-odd years in the southwest inner city.
So just here on the left is Dolphin House, the start of Dolphin House. I grew up in the flats there. I've been up here in a couple of years now.
It's a great place for us to grow up in now, you know. It was always very friendly. Most people were in harmony. You'd have the odd stupid stuff going on here and there, but yeah, generally it was a good area to grow up in. Yeah. Up until around the 80s when the drugs came in.
Bingo!
I could never imagine a world without heroin, never. Never. Do anything for it. Prostitute, do anything. You know, it's just a thing you have to have.
Born addicts. These babies are Dublin's youngest and most innocent heroin victims.
I've got 2 drug addicts over in my own home. Don't bring this pain and sorrow on yourselves and your family.
That's it, yeah.
Where I lived, on any given day there would have been 20 or 30 addicts on the stairs, leading up the stairs. No problem dropping their trousers, injecting into their groin or injecting anywhere. They had to get the money to feed the habit. Now they were assaulting people and robbing them and taking their handbags and breaking into people's homes and stuff like that. Like, people rob their own parents, their own siblings.
I actually sleep with a hammer under my bed. I mean, I feel I have to protect my 2 children, and if anyone comes in, like, I'll kill them.
The children dying, they're walking around like resurrections, and no one cares about them.
Irish police now estimate that Dublin has been subdivided into 10 areas to be worked by 10 major heroin gangs. But the police have had their successes.
There's only one person in town behind all this, and it was Larry Dunn. Eventually, the law caught up with him.
Anti-drugs campaigners were out in force, as they have been every time Dunn's appeared. This time, they had something to cheer about, as one of Dublin's biggest drugs dealers was sent to jail.
For 100 years he should have got. A lot of them, yeah, and anyone belongs to him. There's plenty more Larry Dunns around it, and everybody will have to stand together and root them all out.
Before he was sentenced, Larry Dunn said, "Look, if you think I'm bad, you want to see what's coming behind me." Very prophetic words, and he was right.
As police finally close down the gang, there are others waiting in the wings.
It was a very challenging time for the Irish police force. So I eventually went and worked with the Garda Drug Squad. The small unit became known as the Muckies because we were muck addicts. You hung around flat complexes for hours trying to wait for the gear to arrive. And it was essential for your safety that nobody twigged that you were a cop. From working in Dublin City, you began to realise there's somebody else in the market. There was this constant flow of heroin starting to take over the market, and it was more reliable and more consistent, and there were different individuals behind it. And after a period of investigating, the name Chris Kinahan came up. He was the figure behind it. He was at the top of the apex. And the beauty of it all is he's not known to be in the drug trade. He's not known as a real criminal. In fact, he's not known at all, realistically. But Chris Kinahan, he fancied himself, and his desire to show off was his downfall. We had heard that he drove a red sports car, which was unusual in recession-hit Dublin at the time. Saw the car arrive in what was then a luxury flat complex in the suburbs of North Dublin. So we had to figure out what flat he was in. Myself and another guy dressed as electricians went around the flat complex, knocking on doors and trying to figure out who was in what flat. On one or two occasions, people asked us about fridges. I know we fixed one fridge on one of the floors. I saw Chris Kinahan and I saw some activity at the flat he was in. So I realised we had it identified. We went to the door with my colleagues. It was opened by an Algerian man who was also in the apartment. We identified ourselves and went in. Chris Kinahan was seated at a table eating a salad roll. He looked up and visibly paled. On another table was what I could only describe it as the mother lode. He asked me my name. He said, "Is your name Sullivan?" I said, "It is." He said, "I was told to look out for you." I told him, "You should have took that advice."
Following the jailing of several major drug dealers in recent times, other people moved in to set up new importation and distribution networks, and this was one of them. When drug squad detectives raided the luxury apartment at Fairview, they found Dubliner Christopher Kinahan with over £100,000 worth of heroin.
This shows the kind of ambition he has. This isn't just some sort of a local drug dealer selling gear on the streets. This is somebody with the ambition to become a major player internationally.
Gardaí believed the apartment was the nerve centre of a big drugs ring.
He's caught with an Algerian who is well known on the international stage. He's making international connections. He's gone from being the guy, the fence, who sold the stolen goods, to being a major, significant character on the international stage. He's been described to the courts as the director of operations. So that's a very significant step he's taken.
Judge Moriarty said a horrifically high quantity of heroin had been found in the apartment. Kinahan was jailed for 6 years.
As a civil society, they go to jail. That's what we believe ends a criminal career, but in actual fact, Christy Kinahan used that time to make even more serious contacts, to grow his ambitious plan for the future. I mean, at the time, you just think it's the fall of another drug dealer, but, you know, this is just the beginning.
Cocaine, heroin, E-tabs, you name it, it's available.
This is the South Inner City Oliver Bond flat complex. It's here that Christopher Jr. and Daniel Kinahan were brought up by their mother, Jean Boylan, who was a cleaning lady. Their father was absent when they were children because he was in and out of prison. This area would have been ravaged, really, by drugs. Jean Boylan, by all accounts, was somebody who helped out with addiction charities. And she seemed to have wanted something different for her boys. I don't know a huge amount about Christopher Jr. He seems to be, maybe we'll say, the boring one of the two. Daniel is a different person today than the person he was when he was here. If you talk to people who knew him at the time, they describe him as a guy who was one of the lads. He was a bit of fun, he was a bit of a prankster. There was obviously a totally different life waiting for him.
One evening, I went for a run through the city centre. I thought I saw somebody in a car looking at me, so I realised I was being followed. A car came whizzing over behind and passed me. I glanced at it and I realised, I said, it's Chris Kinahan. I went back to the office and I said to some of the guys, I'm after seeing Chris Kinahan. So they told me you couldn't have seen him, he's still doing time. So we rang the prison and found out that he was released. He was sentenced to 6.5 or 7 years. Far too lenient, but that's the way it was in those days. You only ever get one chance to catch a serious drug supplier because they've learned from their mistakes.
Christy Kinahan Senior came back for the Kinahan boys as they came of age as teenagers here.
His presence gives them a bit of kudos, a bit of street. Daniel undoubtedly is looking up to his father as his hero. He wants to become him, and he creates his own little fiefdom within the Oliver Bond flat complex.
It was here where they made a decision to follow their father into organised crime.
Two guys on a motorbike shot the victim 4 times in the head. We don't even know who the guy is yet, but it's another night in Dublin. This is another gangland killing, just another one, you know.
I'm Paul Williams. I was the former crime reporter with the Sunday World. I've been covering crime for about 35 years. I suppose sounding a bit like a junkie, you got addicted to it.
I just got a call there a few hours ago from somebody who's been working with us closely.
There was a fascination with crime in Ireland, and because there was so much crime happening. So there was fascination with these shadowy figures.
We have our Mafia type godfathers now.
These guys were getting more dangerous, more sinister, more prepared to blow anybody away who tried to stop them or tried to expose them.
I put together a surveillance team. We went out after them, we just photographed them. And of course, they started selling huge amounts of newspapers. But like the world fell in on top of myself and my other crime reporting colleagues at the time when Veronica Guerin was murdered.
Veronica Guerin, one of the Republic's foremost journalists specialising in stories about underworld and criminal figures, was shot here on the Nace Dual carriageway about 10 miles from the centre of Dublin.
Veronica Guerin was a colleague of mine. She was very single-minded, very capable journalist, and she was murdered because she did her job. And she asked the questions that nobody else was asking. The Veronica's car was just up there now. I walked over to Veronica's very distinctive red car. She was lying there in a very smart suit. You could see this mass of dark was clearly blood, but she was lying and she was being held back by the safety belt. It was fucking horrible. That image is burned into my memory. After Veronica was murdered, for me, it wasn't business, it was personal.
I feel that I have a duty to keep going. That's what a free press is about. And no gangster with no gun is going to stop us.
Christy Kinahan wasn't involved in this outrage, but he was a senior member of this emerging new generation of narcos. And there was a small group at the time. They counted about 5 or 6 major players. They were all working together. Veronica was murdered because she asked the crime boss, where did you get your money? And they decided to murder her. And they thought they could do it. This was the beginning of a whole new era of organised crime.
Thousands of people have been attending the funeral of the crime reporter Veronica Guerin. Among the mourners was the Irish President, Mary Robinson, and the Prime Minister, John Bruton.
Veronica Guerin was denied her right to life by organised crime.
Her murder represents a direct attack on our democracy.
The Irish Parliament has approved sweeping new legislation to deal with the growing problem of organised crime linked to drugs.
Armed with new powers of search, the Gardaí are getting tough.
The Criminal Assets Bureau's opened its doors to television cameras. Accountants, police, customs, social security and tax investigators trace assets of major criminals from here.
There is no messing around with this. They say to you, you owe us, and if you don't pay us up, we're going to take your house.
The government brought in the Criminal Assets Bureau, and they could go after the assets of criminals. And of course, then it had the effect of forcing Christy Kinahan's fellow drug traffickers to leave the country and base their operations outside of Ireland.
Christy Kinahan in the 90s decided, to flee from Ireland and find a safe haven in Amsterdam. Behind that tall building and all those buildings, that's really the old red light district. And that's where Christy Kinahan was hanging out. Organized crime was basically in the center of town. I think it was Paul Williams who referred to Amsterdam as the Wall Street of the international drug market. Be it Irish, British, Spanish, Colombian, Venezuelan, you name it, and they were all here to do the same illegal business. Christy Kinahan came to Amsterdam in the middle of the 1990s. The wall in Berlin had fallen. The mood of most nations in Europe turned very optimistic. And ecstasy was actually a drug that fit that mood perfectly. When Christy Kinahan came to Amsterdam, that thing was on the rise. And he saw the market, and he saw a chance, and he took that chance. The boom was from like 93, 94 on into the new century. And that was really the time where Christy Kinahan and his associate John Cunningham were in the Netherlands.
When Christy Kinahan was nicked for the big heroin haul, John Cunningham and Christy Kinahan find themselves on the same landing in prison after one was convicted of drug trafficking and the other was convicted of kidnapping.
John Cunningham, referred to by his accomplices as the Colonel, had decided to go for the big one.
John Cunningham was very much a part of that generation of professional armed robbers. He was always after the one big job. And that was a kidnapping, where they kidnapped Jennifer Guinness, who was married to the heir to the Guinness fortune.
The gang forced their hostage into a car and headed north towards Swords, leaving a demand for a ransom of £2 million and the code word Jackal.
This was going to be the key to the big time, and they'd never have to work again. They were caught.
Mrs. Guinness's 8-day ordeal ended just before 7 o'clock this morning. It was around midnight that police tracked Mrs. Guinness and 3 members of the gang who abducted her to a smart Dublin townhouse. Shots were fired and he was arrested.
John Cunningham told the Gardaí it was going to be the big one, but it went wrong. He was jailed for 17 years.
This would be part of the general story of organised crime, is that the relationship and friendships that build up on the landings in the prison become lifelong friendships. It was from that time on that himself and John Cunningham basically become partners in crime.
John Cunningham caused a major embarrassment for the Irish authorities when he absconded from Shelton Abbey Open Prison in County Wicklow.
In September 1996, Cunningham is in open prison. We did a runner, and he gets out of the country, and he was smuggled into Amsterdam. Christy puts his arm around him, introduces him to the drug trade. And that's the start of probably one of the most powerful criminal cartels in European history.
Rock and roll is dead. That's the view of a lot of young people. From Russia to the United States, it's been replaced by what they call a cultural revolution. Dance, house or rave music, and with the music go the drugs. In particular, what's termed the ultimate fashion accessory, ecstasy or E.
Unbelievable, you know, it's hard to explain, but you just get a rush up your spine every time you hear a good tune, you know?
Then you can start feeling and then you're getting heavier and heavier, you know? They're the rushes you get off, pushes your adrenaline level up real high, you know? And all of a sudden, yeah, the music starts getting going around dancing and that, you know?
For the pushers of drugs, there's no shortage of work or profit. It's a lucrative, if dangerous, trade.
By the mid-1990s, the criminal landscape had changed. All of a sudden, this whole generation who would never have probably gone down the drug route were seeing this as being a fun night out. There was e-parties everywhere and there was raves. And Christopher Jr. and Daniel start ecstasy dealing in Dublin, in the south inner city, with their father's product from Amsterdam. In particular, Daniel seems to start providing his own group with drugs. And I think Daniel sort of morphs into the father. And there's only one way they're going, and that's after Christy Kinahan Senior out to Europe to learn the drug business.
At the beginning of 1997, Christy Kinahan Senior breaks cover and comes back to his father's funeral. He's wanted in Ireland on £16,000 worth of stolen traveller's cheques were taken in an armed robbery, and he was caught cashing them. So he was wanted on that charge. He comes home, he's busted.
I was assigned to interview him with another colleague, and by his very nature, Chris Kinahan wouldn't say very much. During the course of the interview, he remained silent for quite a period of time and broke the silence to say, "You think you're so smart. I followed you." I said, "I know," and I told him the car and the registered number of the car that he followed me in. And then he went silent again, and that was the last conversation we had. But it was the intent, the menacing intent, that he would try and get inside your head.
Portlaoise has been the country's main high security prison since IRA prisoners were transferred there in 1973. And a continuous guard of over 100 troops back up the Gardaí, who in turn back up the prison officers.
My name is David MacDonald. I was a prison officer. I served in Portlaoise Prison from 1991 to 2000. Part of my role was in the education unit, where I came in close contact with the prisoner known as Christy Kinahan. So the prison was known as the most secure prison in Europe. It was a maximum security prison. So we had a lot of troublesome and difficult prisoners. It's not difficult to remember Christy Kinahan, even from back then. He was charismatic, he was very calm, he kept himself immaculate, he kept the cell immaculate. He didn't cause bother, he used his time extremely wisely, which very few prisoners do. Studied courses at a very high level, degree level, in both Spanish and Russian. Because of my role in the education unit, I would see his marks, and they were always very, very high, very, very high. I've never seen a prisoner ever refuse early release. Never, not in 31 years. Christy Kinahan was offered early release. He refused it. He was doing a degree course at the time. He reckoned he could do it better inside the prison. And I don't want to come across that I'm saying I admire Christy Kinahan. There's a reason why the US have a $5 million bounty on him and also on his 2 sons. So I'm not an admirer. But the truth is, he was a little bit of royalty in a goldfish bowl of thuggery.
When Christy's in prison and he knows his business is okay, Daniel Kinahan, who's now just in his early 20s, is very much involved at a management level on the Irish side of his father's international drug trafficking operation. There was no doubt about that. There's an intelligence document here from 2000 which clearly points out the fact that, you know, Daniel, on the instructions of his father, Christopher, is visiting him in Portlaoise prison approximately 3 to 4 times a week. This stage, he was well and truly under Daddy's wing and on his way to taking over the family business.
These are the new weapons of the drugs war. Miniature submachine guns are now part of the armoury of Ireland's criminal gangs. Fitted with silencers, their deadly purpose is obvious. But 15 of these weapons, along with 10 pistols and over 300 kilos of cannabis, are in the safe hands of the Gardaí in Monaghan. It's understood the drugs and weapons were hidden in a consignment of frozen food which landed at the port of Dublin yesterday morning.
Just before Christmas 1998, a couple of pallets of pita bread arrived into a food storage facility down on the border in County Monaghan. And when it was removed, it accidentally was broken open by a forklift truck, and out of it spilled nearly a ton of hash and an arsenal of 20 or more machine guns, machine pistols and automatic pistols. It was an extraordinary find and was found purely by accident. A major investigation begins to track down the source of that stuff, which ultimately leads back to Amsterdam and to John Cunningham. And when the Dutch go after you, that means that every phone that John Cunningham used from then on was bugged.
Well, I prefer to protect my identity because over the years in the National Drug Unit, we deprived the Kinahan organised crime group of many millions euros worth of drugs, etc. And I'm happily retired now and I'd like to stay that way. Well, the Dutch police, they were running into some difficulties with the Dublin accents and also with some of the slang terminology that was being used. Myself and a colleague would go over on a weekly basis to assist the Dutch police, listening to the wiretaps and assisting them with interpretation of what was being said. To have all those telephone calls on a computer screen in front of you and listen to them as often as you wished and back and forth, it was amazing.
At one stage, as they're listening to these conversations with Cunningham, they listen to this voice, and it turns out it was Christy Kinahan ringing from Portlaoise prison, where he's still in the nick studying one of his degrees.
Prisoners are allowed to make very brief phone calls. They're recorded. Everything's recorded and listened to, and they know that. Christy Kinahan was extremely clever. He managed to get a mobile phone smuggled into him, which was a feat in itself, because back then mobile phones were the size of a brick. But it allowed him still to run his empire from inside the walls of the maximum security prison in Europe.
There were lots of conversations on the phone between Christy Senior and John Cunningham. Christopher Kinahan always assumed he was being listened to, and as a result of that, he spoke in code. Timber usually referred to cannabis. Powders were either brown, being heroin, or white, being cocaine. It was quite obvious they were arranging the importation of drugs and weapons.
From his prison cell. Like, when he got nicked, never stopped. When he's taken out of the picture, Kinahan, John Cunningham has the same kind of ability when it comes to organisational ability, and he then continues to run the business. And actually, Cunningham, over the next 3 to 3.5 years, builds what Kinahan had left behind him. He builds it into a massive operation, because in the period of 2 years, his first 2 years in the helm, when Christie's in prison, he transports something like 150 to 200 million pounds worth at the time of drugs into Ireland. But then Cunningham is arrested again.
Ecstasy tablets, each with a street value of £10. Over 100,000 of them in packets that could slip into a handbag. Cannabis, carefully wrapped, part of a consignment worth more than £6 million. And more than £500,000 worth of amphetamine powder. The haul of drugs from what the Dutch call Operation Clover. They believe they have smashed a racket in which Dubliner John Cunningham was the central figure.
It's now known that Cunningham and his associates were the subject of a vast surveillance operation, mounted by police forces in Holland, Belgium, the UK and Ireland, using phone taps, videos and covert observation.
By the time Cunningham is arrested again, the boys are massively well embedded in the whole fabric of organised crime across Europe. They are players. And luckily and happily for the boys, Kinahan comes out of prison and takes over the reins just as his friend is busted and put back in prison. They continue to build this massive, probably Europe's most powerful drug cartel. And it also is at a time when the demand for drugs amongst ordinary law-abiding citizens of Europe goes through the roof.
Only one drug is so addictive, 9 out of 10 laboratory rats will use it. And use it. And use it. Until dead. It's called cocaine, and it can do the same thing to you.
With the mass introduction of cocaine to Ireland, there was this really dramatic upsurge in gangland violence. The only way to settle arguments was to kill.
Esta gente tan potente nunca espera que al final le van a detener.
Este es el momento en el que la policía entra en una de las casas de los presuntos miembros de la mafia irlandesa situada en la Costa del Sol.
He wanted to get to the pinnacle of world boxing, which he actually nearly did.
I'm sure Daniel can hold his own in the head-to-head.
This was an attempt to take off the head of the snake. And they'd missed. What had they unleashed on themselves?
The Kinahan organisation wanted to wipe out anybody who bore the name Hutch.
The murder may be linked to the ongoing Hutch-Kinahan gangland feud that has claimed up to 18 lives.